So let's talk about protection and betrayal. I was hearing this story the other day of a woman in a narcissistic relationship. What else is new? But she was never sure if her partner was narcissistic. She wondered if he was just busy, ambitious, just not a feelings kind of guy. She knew that he grew up with a cold and remote father and a very silenced mother. In her case, her long-term partner was never her advocate, never her ally. Her sense of not being safe with him came from the sense that she was never protected by him. When someone would treat her badly, for example, even when she might be dealing with someone doing work on the house of some kind, and she was not being treated well by them, there was no attempt to listen to what she went through, to support her, and more often than not, the husband seemed to take the side of the other person. He'd say things to her like, well, come on, they know what they're talking about, or don't be so demanding, or maybe they're right and you're the one who doesn't know what the hell you're talking about. It was never about right and wrong for her. It was the sense that in the wake of being mistreated or treated disrespectfully by someone, that her own life partner, her husband in this case, it was that he wouldn't step in or advocate for her or listen to her or be her person. And that certainly that he wouldn't just take the stance that the other person must be right. And so what if they raise their voice at you? She also noted that if her husband had been treated this way by someone who had come into their home to do some work, he would have spun out of control, started screaming, asked to speak to their supervisor, and would have threatened to sue. In fact, his sort of really volatile reactions were a part of the reason why she was stepping in to manage more of this stuff in their household. Now, this dynamic replicates in every single narcissistic relationship. While the manipulation, the gaslighting, the betrayals, the future faking, the rage, the passive aggression, the silent treatment, the entitlement, the low empathy are all the in-your-face stuff, we often lose sight of the ultimate betrayal that happens all the time in these relationships. Narcissistic people do not protect the people in their lives. What does it mean to be protected? I don't mean like a bodyguard. I mean a person who doesn't deny your reality, a person who doesn't always automatically take the perspective of the other person and assume that someone else is right and you're wrong, asking questions to you like, what did you do to piss him off? A person who sits with you at an uncomfortable time, like when you're getting a medical diagnosis or bad news about work. A person who doesn't mock or humiliate you in front of other people. A person who believes you, who cares for you at a physically vulnerable time of your life, who doesn't treat you like you're crazy. A person who doesn't take advantage of your vulnerabilities. That's protection. And when we love people the right way, we protect them. I don't mean bubble wrap them or hover over them or control them or do everything for them. That's not protection, that's control. By definition, the narcissistic parent does not protect their child. They demand and they do not support, and they do not attune, and they do not bear witness, and they do not advocate. And if they do advocate, it's to forward their own selfish ego interests. Why didn't my kid get to play in the game? My child better get a spot in your preschool. You have to give my kid a job. But that's not to protect the child per se. That's just for them to exert their muscle. The child who is fortunate enough to be protected doesn't have to devote so many of their psychological resources to protecting themselves. And the less protected and more harmed the child, the more the child internally fragments, living life in internal survival and self-protection mode, and not being able to take risks and live life as themselves because everything's going towards protection. The narcissistic parent operates from the stance of always framing it as, what did the child do wrong? How did the child inconvenience them? Versus, how can I be present with my child? Keep them safe, not helicopter parent safe, psychologically safe. And let the child know they have a safe and secure base when things don't go right, because they sometimes don't. And that they have a place that they can come with anything and not be shamed, humiliated, questioned, doubted, or treated as though they're a problem. Doesn't mean the parent's always agreeing. It means that the parent is a safe space. In narcissistic intimate relationships, this lack of protection is a classical dynamic that often gets missed. We focus so much on the lying, cheating, gaslighting, manipulation pieces, but when you think about it, really look back on or at the relationship you're in, you're not protected. In fact, one of the greatest griefs that can come up in any narcissistic relationship is looking back and recognizing that you might have actually witnessed the narcissistic person stepping up and advocating for or fighting for someone else, even at your expense. This can foster this constant set of not good enoughness, why not me-ness. The sense that the narcissistic person, they could protect someone, it just wasn't you. To not be protected in a narcissistic intimate relationship means that you were left to twist in the wind. Nothing. No guidance or hearing you or catching you when you fall. Though they do often cause the fall, but that's a different story. Or putting you in the family in financially perilous positions, or you having to make difficult decisions around the household or children or pets because of their irresponsibility, and not being able to consult with them because then they would rage at you or call you, tell you there's something wrong with you. Narcissistic irresponsibility actually contributes a lot to this non-protected dynamic. To be in a narcissistic relationship is simultaneously feeling that you are in a relationship with a tantruming 3-year-old and a sullen, non-contributing to the household adolescent, but with all the power and perks of an adult. When we are sad, crying, fragile, or in pain in a relationship, we want to feel comforted and soothed and held, and that rarely happens in a narcissistic relationship. These moments are often when you feel the least protected of all. There may be gaslighting, and they may say things like, "Really? You're crying about this? It's not that big a deal." There'll be these eye rolls they do, or a big sigh, like, okay, what's wrong? That's because they have to soothe you, or just a full-on rejection. I do not have time for this. And this all feels rejecting and cold and invalidating. But at the core of it, they are not protecting you. You aren't safe. You become fragmented to feel safe, and you live life in a restricted and anxious manner. When we think of relational abuse, we often think of what someone does to someone else. Yell, scream, hit, lie, push, curse, call them names. But oftentimes, the most harmful things that happen in these relationships is what someone does not do. We are not protected, and we don't even register that, nor does the world. If someone pushes you or yells at you, other people can understand that's a problem. But when you are not protected, there's often the sense that you're a grown-up, you can protect yourself. It's not that you can't. It's that in a relationship, psychological safety is fostered by the idea that the person you are in a relationship with is there for you. Not that they're just agreeing with everything you do and say, but they're sort of a team with you. Just as the child who feels protected will ultimately take more risks and allow their true selves to form, the same thing happens in adult relationships when we feel protected. We take more risks. We trust ourselves because we know there's a safe place to come back to. And above all, we don't feel crazy. And that does not happen in a narcissistic relationship. So take a moment, if you want, and reflect on this idea of protection or lack thereof in your narcissistic relationships and how that affected you. When you're not protected and we're not protected, the world feels riskier. We feel less courageous. We feel not enough. We also know that when a person has experienced trauma, the harm comes from both the traumatic actions themselves and the nature of the response afterwards. When a person is harmed and there is the sense that there's no one you can safely tell afterwards or who will believe you or take care of you or even advocate and fight for you and protect you in the future. For example, if somebody was protecting a child, that would mean ensuring that the abusive person is no longer allowed near the child. But we know that often doesn't happen. And when those things are missing, the impact of the trauma is significantly worse. And the fragmentation happens internally. Instead of the child, and frankly for most adults, noting that the people around me aren't protecting me, instead the child feels, the child feels, I'm bad. I'm not protectable. And the psyche and the nervous system organize in a way that forever leave you responding to the world as though it's a dangerous place. The harm of narcissistic relationships is not just what happened, but what didn't. Thanks again.